schon Geige?
Seit 13 Jahren, also seit ich 4 bin.
Wie kamst du denn da drauf mit 4?
Meine Eltern.
Die haben dich gezwungen.
Nein, sie haben mich nicht gezwungen. Ich mochte schon Geige ein
Du,
bisschen.
also es war nicht so, dass sie gesagt haben, so, du wirst jetzt ein Wunderkind und wir machen dann ganz viel Geld mit dir.
Wunderkind. Born geniuses. We encounter them in modern-day media.
I'm a very stable genius.
Ironically, in influential numbers, young and old faces, promising extraordinary talent. Some seem like a genuine gift from above, while with some you question how they got into this position in the first place. How should we understand what we are witnessing? Are we seeing natural genius unfold? Or something else entirely?
They do exist, just like some people have big noses, some people have little noses.
So when you were talking to Elon Musk, did you get the sense that you were talking to like...
In 1764, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart performed for European royalty. Backstage stood Leopold Mozart, father to extraordinary talent, yes, but also so much more. In 1756, as a result of Leopold Mozart's pedagogical work, he published his attempt at a thorough violin school, which to this day is considered a reference work for the performance style of classical repertoire. But would anyone have thought that he was also a manager, musician, marketing executive, composer, publisher of sheet music, and tour guide? Leopold Mozart organized the tours of his 2 children. He was the manager of the family business and also decided on the programs. His correspondence reveals meticulous planning, strategic presentations to nobility, and careful cultivation of little Wolfgang's public image. Mozartkugeln, the chocolate delicacy, had not yet been invented at that time, but they would have pleased the shrewd Leopold very much. Leopold Mozart operated within the patronage system of his time, yet his methods anticipate what German philosopher Theodor Adorno would later identify as the cultural industry, the systematic organization of art as commodity. But here's the key point: Leopold didn't just sell Wolfgang's talent, he sold the idea of natural genius, Wunderkind. The contradiction was already there, as Adorno says. The culture industry perpetually cheats its consumers of what it perpetually promises. But what exactly happens when we call someone a genius?
Someone, let's say a baby, is born. His parents call him by a certain name. They talk about him to their friends. Through various sorts of talk, the name is spread from link to link, as if by a chain. A speaker who is on the far end of this chain, who has heard about, say, Richard Feynman. Feynman is dead now, I think, but he was a big shot, he won the Nobel Prize in physics or whatever. He was a famous big deal physicist. And he had this proper name, the name was Richard Feynman, and people could use that name to talk about him, to refer to him. A speaker who is on the far end of this chain, who has heard about, say, Richard Feynman, may be referring to Richard Feynman, even though he can't remember from whom he first heard of Feynman. He knows that Feynman is a famous physicist. A certain passage of communication reaching ultimately to the man himself does reach the speaker. He then is referring to Feynman, even though he can't identify him uniquely.
American philosopher John Shirley's cluster description theory adds a layer showing that we identify genius not through one essential property, but through overlapping criteria: talent, recognition, cultural impact, mystery, tragedy. A person becomes a genius when enough of those criteria clustered around their name, ticking the boxes. The manufactured Wunderkind can exploit this. They don't need to be geniuses in some essential sense. They need enough genius markers clustering around them to trigger our recognition patterns to a coherent narrative. Also, Daniel Dennett's concept of the center of narrative gravity reveals what's really happening here. Just as a center of gravity is a useful function, there's no actual point where all mass concentrates. The self is a narrative construction that becomes psychologically real. Once you construct yourself as genius, that narrative demands constant feeding. In some sense, Prometheus, the mythical figure who initiated rebellion for mankind, is, so to say, the ancient prototype of our modern understanding of genius, disobeying the gods through the act of artistry, stealing the fire from Olympus. This brings us to a deeper question: what's actually the drive for it? What makes them willing to endure this systematic brutality? In Robert Schneider's novel Brother of Sleep, the musical genius Elias' unrequited love for Elsbeth is controversially inflamed anew after he listens to a cantata by Bach. Come, O Death, you brother of sleep. Ultimately seeing death as the liberator of love and desire. This gesture, similar to the death drive from Freud, suggests artistic devotion that goes beyond conventional success or recognition.
Do you fantasize about international fame? Do you fantasize about winning a Pulitzer Prize? Or a Nobel Peace Prize? An MTV Music Award? Do you fantasize about meeting some genius hunk, ostensibly bad, but secretly simmering with noble passion and willing to sleep on the wet spot?
I'll take two.
What was that?
I'll take two.
Kimberly will take two. You get Lacan's point. Fantasies have to be unrealistic, because the moment, the second that you get what you seek, you can't want it anymore. In order to continue to exist, desire must have its objects perpetually absent. It's not the it that you want, it's the fantasy of it. So desire supports crazy fantasies.
What French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan called the objet petit a isn't just any object of desire, musical fulfillment, etc., in the sense that there is a fuel to desire. It is desire itself that fuels the desiring object. For the Wunderkind, this might appear as fame, as perfect performance, or most likely parental love or recognition from the big other, how Lacan calls it. But it's actually something more fundamental, as Lacan states with his graph of desire, namely the question to the great other, grand autre, the big other, che vuoi? In Italian, what do you want? David Garrett, a child born into wealth and a family that operated instrument auctions and probably Germany's most famous child prodigy, may serve here as a great example of how maintaining a certain image comes with psychological challenges.
Ich will es jetzt nicht übertreiben, aber wenn du in einer Schuhbox aufwächst und du niemanden kennst außerhalb der Schuhbox, ist die Schuhbox die Welt.
David übertrifft immer wieder aufs Neue die Erwartungen des Publikums, was ihn vor der Kritik seines Vaters nicht bewahrt.
Er hat da sehr viel Wert drauf gelegt, dass ich sehr schnell verstehe, was er nicht gut fand. Und dementsprechend hat er das Konzert halt immer direkt aufgenommen. Auf der Autofahrt nach Hause haben wir uns das angehört, wie die Lautsprecher, und hat natürlich dann auch schon direkt die Kritikpunkte geäußert.
It has to be everything very complex and very serious, but actually so that people actually want to listen to it and enjoy it.
Another example of how desire shapes the world of child prodigies is that of British child prodigy Alma Deutscher.
Some people have told me that I compose in the musical language of the past, and that this is not allowed in the 21st century. In the past, it was possible to compose beautiful melodies and beautiful music. But today, they say, I'm not allowed to compose like this anymore, because I need to discover the complexity of the modern world, and that the point of music is to show the complexity of the world. Well, let me tell you a huge secret. I already know that the world is complex and can be very ugly. but I think that these people have just got a little bit confused. If the world is so ugly, then what's the point of making it even uglier with ugly music?
If I love this young composer so much, it's because I relate to her story very well. I was trained by a very conservative classical teacher for a couple of years, and then she recommended that I go on and study with someone else. So I went to a second teacher and I did some lessons with him, and he was very helpful, but he did encourage me to go listen to the music of Bela Bartok in order to branch out and explore. This is what some of his music sounds like. Yeah, I listened to one of these quartets by Bartok for about 2 minutes and then shut it off and never went back again. I'm sorry, but Bela Bartok's string quartets are just hideous. Bela Bartok's string quartets are just hideous.
Bela Bartok's string quartets are just hideous.
The thing you really notice about this is its character. It's sort of declamatory. It's a gesture that immediately gets your attention.
In this particular incident, it would be interesting to see what Alma Deutscher and the commentator from the video would state if they examined what German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel proposes. What someone defines as beauty can only fall into place through their relationship and contamination, what Hegel calls sich anders werden, self-othering, and therefore also breaks the illusion of pure beauty and pure ugliness without their emptiness. Because if they were not in relation to each other, the judgment would be empty. Alma Deutscher therefore needs a constructed understanding of ugliness in order to constitute beauty, or in other words, what's beautiful to her. Also irrelevant whether those constructed images of ugliness are objectively right or wrong or justified. What matters in that moment is the desire for establishing credibility through a coherent narrative to constitute a stable identification of beauty standards through cancel culture. The culture industry uses criticism, outrage, and cancellation as quality filters. Those who break under negative pressure are eliminated. Those who transform it are promised to become something entirely different. A central thesis that emerges here is that the successful are not only those manufactured to greatness. They are the ones who cancel their strawman, their own manufactured narrative of failure in order to constitute their greatness through it. What cancel culture actually does is create rigid opposition, the very identity-fixed thinking that Adorno criticized. When you try to eliminate all contradictions, you eliminate meaning itself, coming back to pure emptiness. Cancel culture tries to create a perfect symbolic order where the object d'art, the impossible object of desire, can finally be possessed through cancelling. The artists who break through simple narration, however, aren't those who avoid the void. They are those who learn to construct something meaningful within it. They discover that the fall isn't a failure, it's the foundation for construction. These artistic beliefs, however, stand in harsh tension with the market narrative, the narrative of quick profit, which prefers marketability and simple narration. The culture industry prefers clear narratives of right and wrong, a totalizing narrative. How do any special artists emerge then at all?
It's a real thing. Coke is
Like Wunderkinder, Coca-Cola doesn't sell you just a highly sugary, unhealthy drink. It sells you the fantasy of being the real thing. The Wunderkind doesn't discover their genius, they build it through hard discipline and resources, and additionally through repeated narrative acts which open up the capacity for new resources and attention. Success culture doesn't sell you achievement, it confronts you and, most importantly, the person themselves with a fantasy that is.
I think I'm a special one.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
Public criticism became essential viral content for the culture industry. Artists respond, adapt to these critics, but some just sadly disappear. Initially, it's convenient to assume artists navigate the landscape differently, thus having different outcomes of success. So the key question for artistic success always becomes what distinguishes those who emerge stronger from those who simply vanish. The need to let suffering speak is a condition of all truth. Negative bias, the phenomenon which describes how criticism spreads faster than praise, may not just be understood as a cognitive flaw or protective reflex, but also as an industrial process. So the Wunderkind in that regard doesn't just want to transcend, they want to elevate into transcendence. The emptiness they are trying to fill, the fantasy of achieving fulfillment, becomes the very thing that consumes them. Isolde Charim's book, The Torments of Narcissism, captures the contemporary predicament in the chapter Competition and Its Beyond.
Wenn du der Erste bist, wenn du sozusagen die meisten Likes hast, dann kannst du der Konkurrenz entgehen. Dann wirst du einzigartig. Dann bist du nicht mehr, dann beziehst du deinen Wert nicht mehr aus der Situation, dass du besser als ein anderer bist, sondern dann bist du sozusagen gerettet. Das heißt, und das ist das, was Sie vorher gesagt haben, am Höhepunkt der Konkurrenz kippt die Vorstellung. Aber das ist nur das Versprechen. Gleichzeitig sind wir aber alle völlig austauschbar. Das heißt, auf dieser Ebene der völligen Austauschbarkeit, über die schwappt dann plötzlich dieser Mythos, man könnte einzigartig werden. Und wie kann man einzigartig werden? Durch Konkurrenz, durch mehr Konkurrenz. Nur durch mehr Konkurrenz. Und wenn man besser wird, dann entkommt man.
This brings us to the crucial question, is the inescapability of this manufactured system entirely inevitable?
Not least, ladies and gentlemen.
July 25th, 1965, Bob Dylan connects his electric guitar at the Newport Folk Festival. The crowd responds with disapproval. The folk establishment questions his authenticity. He continues playing. How do we understand moments like these? When artists persist despite institutional resistance, are they demonstrating stubborn individualism or accessing something more fundamental about creative expression? Determinate negation, Hegel's concept of bestimmte Negation, isn't just saying no. It's transforming the entire framework that's trying to negate you. It makes criticism irrelevant by changing the rules of the game through what we might call a narcissistic imperative.
When someone comes up and says something like, I am a god, everybody says, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought I was, a god. I just told you. That's who I think I am. Would it have been better if I had a song that said, I am a nigga?
This narcissistic imperative, not far away from the pathological narcissism that destroys relationships, serves here as a functional psychological armor.
Darf ich Sie so verstehen, dass niemand von uns, Sie nicht, ich nicht, niemand hier im Publikum dem Narzissmus entkommt? Wir können gar nicht narzisstisch sein.
Genau, das ist sozusagen heute unser Verhängnis. Wir sind alle Narzissten. Und seitdem ich mit diesem Buch Gespräche habe oder so, dann sagen mir die Leute immer, ja, Sie haben völlig recht, der da, mein Nachbar, meine Kinder, das sind alles Narzissten, Sie haben vollkommen recht. Aber der Punkt ist, nein, wir sind alle Narzissten und das ist sozusagen einmal per se mal nichts Böses, sondern das ist die Art, wie wir unser Verhältnis zur Gesellschaft leben. So müssen wir heute sein. Zu Trump komme ich vielleicht noch ein bisschen später, um zu erklären, was da der Unterschied ist. Aber der erste Punkt, da haben Sie völlig recht, ist, wir sind alle Narzissten und es ist heute gar nicht möglich, dem Narzissmus zu entkommen. Aber man muss einmal verstehen, was das bedeutet. Das heißt nicht, dass wir alle so ein aufgeblähtes Ich haben, sondern es heißt, dass wir uns alle dieser Instanz, die in uns selber ist, aber die auch in den gesellschaftlichen Verhältnissen so dominant ist, unterwerfen. Und das ist die Instanz des Ich-Ideals.
Was heißt das? Was ist das Ich-Ideal? Ist das, was man sich darunter vorstellt? Das heißt, ich habe eine Idealvorstellung von mir, wie ich sein soll, und der strebe ich ununterbrochen nach? Oder ist das jetzt so simpel gesagt?
Nein, das ist nicht so simpel, nur das habe es vielleicht. Also ich habe sie nicht, diese Vorstellung. Nein, sie ist mir vorgegeben. Ja, also ich habe sie nicht, weil ich nicht das Subjekt, weil ich nicht der Autor dieses Ideals bin. Dieses Ideal ist immer ein Konglomerat von gesellschaftlichen Vorstellungen, von klassenspezifischen Vorstellungen, von familiären Vorstellungen und von persönlichen, individuellen. Also es ist eine Mischform und es ist sozusagen das, was uns eigentlich knechtet. Diese Vorstellung einer besseren Version unserer selbst, der wir ständig nachrennen, die eine ständige Anforderung ist an uns, die wir aber nie erreichen können.
The paradox here is profound. To create work that genuinely connects with others, artists may need to maintain an unusually self-referential frame. The German philosopher Hans-Georg Möller's concept of prophelicity helps us understand this. In our profile-driven society, we are constantly performing curated versions of ourselves. Successful artists develop aesthetic authority. They make others adapt to their reality rather than nourishing critical thinking to create opportunities for autonomous thinking and choices. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart isn't innocent of this phenomenon either. If he finds a listener who just thinks something is beautiful without understanding it, he insultingly calls them Papageno, the birdman from his opera The Magic Flute. Nikolaus Anoncourt, the expert on historical performance practice, also wrote the following in his book Music as Speech. He meant this in an extraordinarily pejorative way and emphasized that he wrote solely and exclusively for connoisseurs. Mozart attached great importance to being understood by true connoisseurs, and he expected his listeners to have musical knowledge and general education, since it was becoming common for uneducated people to feel that they had the right to pass judgment in the field of music. Mozart could occasionally get very angry. This dynamic is parallel to what the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire described in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, how authority in any shape or form can deflate curiosity and creativity through oppressive structures.
I defend the duty of the teachers to teach the cultivated pattern, and I defend the right of the kids or of the adults to learn the dominant pattern. But it is necessary, in being a democratic, tolerant teacher, it is necessary to make clear to the kids or to the adults that their way of speaking is as beautiful as our way of speaking. Second, that they have the right to speak like this. Third, nevertheless, they need to learn the so-called dominant syntax for different reasons. That is, the more the oppressed, the poor people, get the command on the dominant syntax, the more they can articulate their voices and their speech in the struggle against the injustice. I would say to you that I am a curious being.
What remains? The German-Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han states that the myth of Prometheus can now be reinterpreted as an achievement subject who thinks himself free is in reality chained like Prometheus. The eagle that eats at his constantly regenerating liver is his alter ego with whom he wages war. Seen this way, the relationship between Prometheus and eagle is a self-relationship. So bound by the self-obligatory desire to be entrepreneurs of our own identities, the more intensely someone pursues recognition, the more isolated they become. This, in hindsight, is found to be a root cause of trauma, as French psychiatrist Boris Cyrulnik explains.
Il y a une hypertrophie de l'amygdale. L'amygdale, c'est une zone profonde, une ampoule à la face interne du cerveau qui traite les émotions. Ce qui veut dire que si on ne parle pas à un bébé, si on ne l'entoure pas, on sculpte son cerveau et on le rend incapable de maîtriser ses émotions, puisque l'amygdale envoie des émotions intenses, et désormais, toute information devient pour lui une agression, puisqu'il ne sait pas traiter. Il a peur de tout, il sursaute, il se met à trembler, il a peur de tout. Donc c'est pour ça qu'il n'y a pas de barème de traumatisme possible. On ne peut pas faire de barème de traumatisme, ça dépend de la manière dont notre cerveau, et plus tard notre histoire, notre personnalité, notre cerveau et notre histoire éprouvent et interprètent ce qui nous arrive. Si on a été isolé précocement, on éprouve et on interprète tout comme une agression. Si on a été sécurisé précocement, on éprouve toutes les informations comme une invitation à explorer, avec une petite émotion, un petit stress, comme tout le jeu. Quand on a un bébé, quand nous-mêmes on joue, on a un petit stress. Et ce stress fait partie du plaisir de vivre. C'est-à-dire qu'on a besoin d'un peu de stress pour vivre. Et lorsqu'il n'y a pas d'altérité, un autre pour nous parler ou pour jouer avec nous, notre cerveau fonctionne différemment. On perçoit le monde de manière apte. On a acquis une vulnérabilité. On perçoit le monde comme une agression potentielle. Et c'est ce qu'on n'avait pas compris quand on travaillait avec les enfants abandonnés ou les enfants des rues. Naïvement, on était là pour aider ces enfants, donc on voulait les aider. Et quand on entrait, comme des occidentaux naïfs, on leur souriait et on leur tendait les bras. Et on a été stupéfait de voir que quand on souriait à ces enfants, ils se mordaient ou ils se tapaient la tête par terre. Et quand on leur tendait les bras, ils prenaient une posture d'enfant battu. Parce qu'on n'avait pas compris que ces enfants non socialisés, ces enfants sans altérité, leur sourire, c'était montrer les dents, leur tendre les bras, c'était les menacer. On n'avait pas compris ça.
Will you stay with me while I sleep a little?
According to Byung-Chul Han, inspecting the burnout or the tiredness itself may give us new answers. Exhausted fatigue is a positive potency. It makes one incapable of doing something. The fatigue that inspires is a fatigue of negative potency, namely of the not to. The Sabbath too, which originally means to cease, is a day of not to. A day that is liberated from everything in order to. After creation, God declared the seventh day holy. Holy is therefore not the day of in order to, but the day of not to, a day when the use of the unusable would be possible. When we look back at Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, we can see both child and product, both genius and a marketing campaign. The tragedy isn't that he was commodified, it's rather that the commodification masked the human being to an oppressive extent that left us with great music, but ultimately led him to an early liberating death.